Hi, my name is Matt Marcellino. Thank you for tuning in to our YouTube channel. I'm an attorney here at Marcellino and Tyson, sitting across from Andria Marquez. She's a family law attorney here in our office, and family law is obviously one of the practice areas that we do a lot of. We get a lot of questions, speaking of the word a lot, as to what happens when someone violates a court order, right? Because we live in the world of lots of court orders, right? Especially when we're talking about family law. Right. So when someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I believe that the other party, the mom or the dad, is in violation of the court order," what are they talking about? What are then you going to talk to them about, and what is really the subject matter at hand?
Yeah, so anytime you have a court order, what is the recourse for that? Well, the recourse would be contempt. There are different types of contempt, but generally what we're saying is like, okay, let's say you have a custody order, for example, and one of the parents violates that custody order. That could be anything from, maybe the order says that both parties are to discuss education. And let's say one parent signs the child up for a school without talking to the other parent. That would be a pretty serious violation of that order, and the remedy is contempt.
Okay. So when this occurs, right? Does the party that feels like they have been wronged by the other one, they have to file a motion with the court, correct?
That's right.
Okay. And when you said that there's different types of contempt, what are those types, just real quick?
So that's civil contempt and criminal contempt.
Okay. And criminal contempt is when we're trying to punish someone for an act that they've done.
That's right.
That technically can't be undone.
Right.
Okay.
That's the distinction there.
And then civil contempt is when someone is in a continuing violation of the order. Best example would be
child support.
Non-payment of child support, right?
Right.
So that's probably going to be more of a civil contempt scenario. But what we'll do is, because they are similar but very different, we'll do a future YouTube video on the difference between criminal and civil contempt. But for the purpose of today, because there's always a lot of questions about how can we right what has been wronged, it's the contempt process, right?
Right.
So in this scenario, if a client were to come to you and say, "I believe that the other party has signed my kid up for a school that I didn't agree to," right? What is the first thing you do as an attorney? And I know that might be a weird question, but like, what are you referring to at first before you even respond to whether or not there's a contempt?
Right. I'm going to look at that order,
Okay.
and I'm going to see, what is legal custody in this situation, or what was the requirement to see if it was violated.
Okay. And then once you establish like there was a requirement, then you go through the analysis with your client as to why the other person may have violated that, meaning they didn't follow the rules.
Right.
Right. And that's kind of the analysis you do with them. What sort of information are you looking for from your? Let's stick with the hypothetical of dad signed up the kiddo at a different school and he didn't talk to mom, right? So what information are you trying to get from your client to ascertain whether or not there's truly been a violation of the court order?
So I'll want evidence of the communication between the parties, the communication that the client received showing that the child was signed up for this school. When did they first hear about it? And, what specifically was supposed to have been done, before anyone signed the child up for school. Like, usually that's a conversation. And if, maybe they can't agree, maybe there's a parenting coordinator, and did they skip all those steps and just go straight to signing up?
Okay.
That's a problem, and I'm going to want to gather all of the evidence around signing the child up for school and the communication before that.
Because we attorneys, we can't file a motion that's frivolous or lacks merit, right? So we have to go through we have to jump through the hurdles, or the hoops, to check all the boxes before we can file, in our opinion, confirming that contempt has occurred, right?
Right.
So in the hypothetical, right, what we're probably talking about, you refer to legal custody, and in this scenario, I presume the language says something to the effect of that both parties will speak to each other in good faith and try to cooperate, and et cetera, before they make any decisions, right? That sort of jazz.
Right. That's what most of our orders say when two people have joint legal custody.
Because I've always thought of the court order in the custody realm to be a list of rules, and also like a platform or a vehicle for co-parenting.
Right.
Right. So because there's a lot of language that might say you must talk with each other about a new school, you must do these things. And that's just a means to have that communication about whether or not to change the school, right? So if that's in there and dad didn't talk to mom and the evidence supports that, then arguably he's in contempt.
Right.
Right.
And and then the next step would be we would file the motion for contempt.
Mm-hmm. And what in that scenario would you be asking the court to do?
Right. So there are a few ways that you can essentially, punish for this wrong behavior. And really just generally, what a judge can do is they can censure someone, reprimand them.
Mm-hmm.
They can issue a fine of up to $500, or they can incarcerate them, issue jail time for generally up to 30 days for a violation.
So putting a child into another school without speaking with the other parent, that's just wrong. Like on all levels, I think, aside from whether or not there's a court order. But in this scenario, there is a court order, and that court order doesn't let you do that. So dad violated the court order. He's going to be in trouble. Then the question is like, what do we do with the child now? He or she is in a new school, right? Some judges might allow you to pull the child back in the contempt hearing. But I think there's other means and mechanisms for us to use, which is to file additional motions on top of the motion for contempt.
Right.
Because, you want to make sure that you have all of your available options thrown on the table when you go to court. And you got to get all of them noticed. Temporary restraining orders, preliminary injunctions. Maybe you're now filing a motion to modify.
Right.
Because maybe there's reason for that child to be at that new school. So dad might have violated the order, but maybe something has occurred since the entry of the order, right, that would justify the child being there or not, right? And therefore the judge can make a ruling from that scenario. So you can still be in contempt of something, but there might be reasons for your actions that might be related to another type of motion that we would file as an attorney. It depends on the circumstances.
Right.
And our hypothetical is really, really narrow, right? It's like dad didn't talk to mom, dad enrolled kid in a new school, right? Simply put, that's absolutely contempt. Right? There's just no way around that
Right.
one in most circumstances here in North Carolina anyway. But the question that I also always get is like, what do we do with the child?
Right.
Do they get pulled back if someone is found in contempt? And you've already pointed out the statute only allows for so much authority by the judge to punish the individual.
Right.
So, but it doesn't really comment on what to do with the kiddo. But I think like in many circumstances, the judge can pull them back and be like, nah, that's not going to happen. Not to mention, you and I know very well that you can file an emergency motion and you can get in front of a judge super, super fast potentially when dad does act. And that might be the subject of another motion and still filing contempt down the road and so forth, right?
Right.
But the question is, how do I hold them? How do I make them accountable? And you've explained contempt perfectly. There's an order. It clearly says this. You're in trouble, you're now found in contempt, and you're either going to be thrown in jail, there's going to be a fine, you're going to pay money, maybe attorney's fees, censure, that slap on the wrist that everyone
Right.
talks about, just an array of stuff, but it corrects the wrong as best
right.
it can. But there's still other stuff that we would file depending upon the circumstances of what went down with this child being enrolled into another school.
To try and remedy
Correct.
the issue in the first place.
Correct. But it makes me think of some other questions that I always have about contempt. We keep talking about somebody is clearly in violation of a court order, right? The order says don't do this and somebody does it, right? That's okay. We get that part at this point, right? However, what if the order isn't clear, right? So when somebody's actually being held in contempt or alleged to have committed contempt, what's the analysis that the court's actually doing regarding the wrongful party, the dad in our hypothetical, right? What's the analysis towards him as to whether or not he was actually in contempt?
Right. So, well, first, the order has to be in effect at the time that it was violated. The second is, did they have the means and ability to comply with the order? Meaning, could they have followed the order? And then the third is it willful? Was it a willful violation? If the order isn't clear, then it's going to be very difficult to prove that it was a willful violation. Like, so if dad thought that the order meant something else because it was ambiguous, then the judge is going to have a hard time finding that that person was in contempt.
Yeah, because the dad or the mom, whoever is alleged to have violated the order, it always goes back to their intent, right? Did they know what the order said? Could they have complied with it? And they chose not to, right? An intentional act, I chose not to. I chose to disregard that court order. Well, then you're probably going to be held in contempt, right? But in the scenario of like, I know what the order says to me, but it says something maybe different to you because of the way it was drafted. So now the order is unclear. And if it's unclear, then you can't say that somebody intentionally violated it because they're following it as to their understanding. But if the order is essentially unclear, then you can't follow it, right?
Right.
So if you can't follow it, you can't be held in contempt.
Exactly.
Right? So that's always something from the defense side. Like they're always looking at, it's like, well, did my client have the ability to comply? Did he understand the order? Is it unclear, et cetera, as it means to defend against being held in contempt? And it comes up way more than you would think, in my opinion.
Right.
Right?
It does.
Because sometimes folks at home, and there's nothing wrong with this, they make their own court orders, right? And sometimes when it gets in front of a judge, it's a little unclear as to what's actually transpiring or what needs to happen. I'm not suggesting that everyone always hire a lawyer. You don't have to. But we do this a lot, and we're in front of judges a lot, and especially on contempt circumstances. So we know probably the best way to draft these orders to at least remove the confusion that might be in the words.
And these are the sorts of things that we look out for when we're drafting orders. Like, is there ambiguity here? Is there something that's not clear that both parties aren't going to necessarily have the same understanding of the meaning? And we try and avoid that.
Right. So like back to our hypothetical with the dad that put the child in the new school without talking to mom, if the legal custody provision just simply said they're going to share legal custody, period.
What does that mean?
Well, what does that mean, right? So like that to me sounds like they both get to do whatever they want, and it's the Wild West. So maybe dad didn't violate the order by putting the child in the school because it didn't require him to have a conversation. It didn't require mom's input at all because it doesn't state that. It's unclear. The implication might be that they should be co-parenting, but an implication probably leads to confusion in a court order. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So like, so anyway, so the judge it's a big deal. Contempt is a big deal.
Absolutely.
People should not want to be held in contempt, nor should they want to violate a court order. Our judges do not enjoy that, right? And they're there for a reason, and if they're being abused, then the recourse is contempt, among other things, right? So, and again, you hit on a couple of really interesting details that we didn't go into, which is the different types of contempt, which is criminal contempt and civil contempt. And I think that's probably better served for another YouTube video because they are similar but very different. They have different recourse. They have different circumstances in which you can file them. And sometimes attorneys or individuals might file a criminal contempt motion that is not grounds for criminal contempt. It actually should have been called a civil contempt. And therefore you went down the wrong rabbit hole and your motion is going to be denied. But I think that would be a very good YouTube video in the future to maybe get more into the weeds on the difference between the two. And if you're interested, I'd love to have you back to do that. Because you're right. This is fun.
Yeah.
Right. It's fun to talk about these things. It's
Yeah.
fun to help try to educate the people that are actually looking for certain information.
And that's an interesting distinction, the civil and criminal contempt and how they differ and when we use them. So I'd love to talk about that later.
Yeah. Because contempt comes up constantly. So
All the
I think the takeaway is the court order is the law of your life. Follow it to the best of your ability and make certain that it's not confusing or unclear in certain areas. Because that will lead to a lot of dispute and conflict between moms and dads, which is really unfortunate, right? But those are the takeaways.
Right.
Don't violate the order. Be good, so you won't get in trouble. But also at the same time, make sure that the new law for your life is clearly written.
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, anyway, hopefully this was helpful to understand contempt in general. For a future video, what we're going to do is we're going to break down between criminal and civil contempt. That might be more helpful on a more case-specific scenario. Otherwise, thank you very much and tune into our next videos.
Thank you.